I'd been adopted for exactly 2 days when my new stepmother handed me her toddler's dirty laundry and said, "You're not a guest here. Earn your bed." I was 17 years old, and I'd waited 4 years for someone to sign a piece of paper that made me theirs. I got the piece of paper. I did not get the theirs part. My name is Wren Calloway. Before that, for a while, it was Wren Delacroix Hoyt, the last name of a foster family who kept me for 11 months and then decided over a Sunday dinner I wasn't invited to that they'd rather have a baby than a 15-year-old. Before that, it was just Wren. No last name that stuck. 4 placements in 6 years, 2 disruptions, 1 group home stretch in Ashford, Ohio that lasted 14 months and taught me how to fold a fitted sheet into a perfect square because the house manager did inspections on Thursdays and docked privileges for wrinkled corners. I tell you all this so you understand what it meant when Marcus Doyle looked at me across a courtroom conference table on June 3rd and said he wanted to be my father, not my foster father. My father, permanently, on paper, forever, no more Thursdays. I cried in the courthouse bathroom for 20 minutes after the judge signed it. Ashford County Family Court, Judge Renata Pell. Different Renata, I promise. I'll get to the one that matters. Case number 24 AD 0619, finalized at 11:42 in the morning. I remember the time because I kept checking my phone, like the number itself was proof this was real. Marcus was 44, a regional manager for a HVAC supply company. Soft-spoken, the kind of man who apologized to furniture when he bumped into it. He'd been my mentor through a court-appointed program called Bridges, which paired teens aging out of care with adult volunteers for 2 years before we turned 18. He took me to Fridays for burgers every other Saturday. He remembered I hated tomatoes without being told twice. When he asked, 6 months into knowing me, if I'd ever want a real family again, I said I didn't know if I trusted the word real anymore. He said that was fair. He kept showing up anyway, which is the only kind of proof that ever worked on me. What I didn't fully understand, not then, was that Marcus had gotten married 8 months before he adopted me. Her name was Renata Doyle, 36, and she had a 2-year-old son from a previous relationship named Grover. I'd met her 4 times before the adoption. She was polite in the specific, clipped way people are polite to something they're tolerating. I told myself I was reading her wrong. I'd been wrong about people before, in both directions, so I didn't trust my own radar much anymore. The house was a rental on Birchwood Lane, 3 bedrooms, 1 for Marcus and Renata, 1 for Grover, 1 that had been a home office and got a twin bed shoved into it 4 days before I moved in. Marcus told me, standing in the doorway with a box of my things, that they'd paint it whatever color I wanted once things settled. That was June 1st. Things never settled. June 3rd, the adoption was finalized. Marcus took me to Fridays to celebrate, just the 2 of us, the same booth we always sat in, 3rd from the window. He ordered me a strawberry lemonade like always and said, "It's official. You're stuck with me now." I laughed so hard I choked on ice, and he thumped my back and told the waitress it was a happy emergency. June 5th, I woke up at 7:10 in the morning to Renata standing in my doorway holding a plastic laundry basket heaped with Grover's clothes. She wasn't smiling. She set the basket on the end of my bed like she was delivering a package I'd ordered. "Marcus has an early call," she said. "I've got Grover's pediatrician appointment at 9. I need this washed, dried, and folded by the time I'm back. Cold water on the onesies, they shrink." I sat up, still half in the dream I'd been having, and said something like, "Oh, sure, I can help." I remember I said help.
Sorry to interrupt. Real quick before the story continues. If this story hit close to home, here's the thing. Most people don't figure this stuff out until years later, after it's already cost them something. I put together the manipulation playbook so you don't have to learn it the hard way. 49 patterns, real examples, and exactly what to do the moment you spot one. It's already helped hundreds of people see clearly what took me years to figure out. Links in the description. Okay, back to what happened.
Remember, she corrected me. "This isn't help," she said. "This is your job now. You live here. You eat here. You're going to contribute." Then she reached into the hall closet and pulled out a folded apron, an actual apron, pale yellow with a strawberry pattern, the kind you'd buy a 6-year-old for pretend baking, and tossed it onto the basket. "You're not a guest here," she said. "Earn your bed." I sat there holding an apron that smelled like it had come straight from a store shelf. 2 days after a judge had told me in writing that I belonged to this family the same as anyone born into it. I want to tell you I said something. I didn't. I said, "Okay," and I did the laundry, cold water on the onesies, exactly like she asked. I want to be precise about what happened over the next several weeks because precision is the only thing I have that Renata never managed to take from me. By June 12th, 1 week in, there was a laminated schedule taped to the refrigerator. My name was at the top in Renata's handwriting. 6:45 a.m., start laundry cycle. 7:15, pack Grover's diaper bag. 3:30 p.m., after summer camp pickup. Bathe Grover, prep dinner sides. 7 p.m., dishes, wipe counters, sweep. It wasn't labeled a chore chart. It was labeled in blue marker, Wren's responsibilities. Grover's name did not appear on any chart because Grover was 2, but I want you to understand that the schedule existed for a 2-year-old's care to be delegated entirely to a 17-year-old who had been in the house for 11 days. Marcus wasn't cruel. That's the part that took me longest to untangle. He worked 10-hour days and came home to a clean kitchen and a fed kid, and thanked Renata for holding it all together, never once asking who'd actually washed the dishes at 7:40 that night while he was still on the highway. When I tried once in the first 2 weeks to mention that I was doing a lot around the house, he said, "Everybody pitches in when they're part of a family, Rennie. I used to mow lawns for my stepdad at your age. I didn't say that mowing a lawn once a week and running a toddler's entire domestic operation 7 days a week were not the same unit of measurement. I didn't have the vocabulary yet for what I was noticing. I just had a feeling, low and constant, like a smoke alarm with a dying battery. June 19th, 2 weeks and a day since the adoption. I asked Renata if I could have $20 to go to a movie with Priya, a girl from my new school's summer program, the first friend I'd made in Ashford who didn't know anything about my file. Renata was at the counter cutting Grover's grapes into quarters, a choking hazard thing. She was careful about that. I'll give her that. And she didn't look up. You get room and board here, she said. That's the arrangement. If you want spending money, you can babysit Grover on weekends for the neighbors. They pay $8 an hour. I said I already watched Grover for free every day. She said, that's family. This would be work. I didn't go to the movie. Priya texted me a photo of the popcorn later. I told her I wasn't feeling well. There's a smaller scene from that same week I still think about. Renata's mother, a soft-spoken woman named Carol who visited on Sundays, was sitting at the kitchen table on June 22nd while I fed Grover his lunch, and she said, apropos of nothing, you know, when Renata and Marcus first told me about all this, I said, well, at least the state helps out with kids like that, doesn't it? Takes some of the pressure off. I remember exactly how my stomach tightened, the way you feel a splinter before you can see it. I said, helps out how? And Carol just waved a hand and said, oh, I don't know the details. Some kind of assistance program. Ask Renata, and went back to her coffee. I didn't ask Renata. I filed it away instead, in the part of my brain that had learned over 6 years in the system to notice the sentence that isn't supposed to be said out loud. That's the shape of it in the early weeks. 100 small redefinitions, each one small enough to swallow on its own. Chores became responsibilities, became obligations, became the price of the bed I slept in. And every time I flinched, Renata had a sentence ready that made me sound ungrateful for asking to be treated like a daughter instead of staff. There's a scene I keep coming back to, from June 24th, a Tuesday, because it's the first time I understood the shape of the whole thing, even though I didn't have the proof yet. Marcus's sister Deb came over for dinner. Deb was loud and warm and asked me 11 different questions about myself in the first 10 minutes, which nobody had done since the adoption. At one point she said, gesturing at the spread on the table, Renata, this looks amazing. You've really got it together with 3 kids now. Renata smiled and said, Ren's a big help. Big help. Not my daughter, not part of this family. A help, like a service you'd hired. Deb didn't catch it. I caught it. I excused myself to check the laundry, code by then, for going somewhere private to breathe, and I sat on the closed lid of the toilet for 6 minutes with my hand over my mouth so no one would hear me. There's a scene from July 27th I need to tell you about too, because it's the moment I almost quit fighting entirely, before I'd even found the letter, when I still thought the problem was just me not trying hard enough. I'd burned dinner, actually burned it, a pan of chicken thighs I'd been assigned to prep while also bathing Grover, because Renata had scheduled both for the same half hour, and I hadn't figured out yet that the schedule itself was the problem, not my ability to follow it. Renata stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed while I scraped the pan into the trash, and she said, this is what I mean. This is exactly what I mean. You have one job in this house, and you can't even, and I said, and I remember this because it's the only time I cried in front of her. I have summer camp pickup and Grover's bath and dinner, and I'm one person. And she said, then maybe you need to manage your time better, because that's what adults do. I was 17. I went to my room and sat on the floor with my back against the twin bed and thought seriously about calling my old caseworker and asking if there was any way to undo an adoption, whether that was even a thing that existed. I looked it up on my phone at 11 that night. It is a thing that exists in extreme cases, but reading about it made me feel sick in a different way, like giving up on the one word, daughter. I'd wanted my whole life the second it turned out to be more complicated than I'd pictured. I didn't call anyone. I went to sleep, and in the morning I made Grover's oatmeal at 6:50 like nothing had happened, because by then I already knew how to do that. I'd had 6 years of practice making my face say nothing had happened. There's another scene, smaller, that I only understood the size of much later. August 14th, a Wednesday. I took Grover to the splash pad at Ashford Community Park while Renata got her hair done, one of the few outings I actually enjoyed, because Grover thought the water jets were the funniest thing in the world, and his laugh made the whole week feel lighter. A woman near the benches, a mother of one of Grover's daycare friends, struck up a conversation with me and asked, kindly enough, how long I'd been nannying for the Doyles. I said I wasn't the nanny. I was his sister. She looked genuinely confused, glanced at Grover, back at me, and said, oh, I just meant, Renata mentioned she'd finally found reliable help for the summer. I didn't realize, and trailed off, embarrassed. I told her it was fine, no big deal, and pushed Grover on the swing for another 20 minutes with my face doing the nothing happened thing again. But I thought about the word Renata had used with an actual stranger. Help. Reliable help. Not stepdaughter. Not daughter. I understood, sitting on that bench, that the story Renata told other people about who I was to her had never once included the word family, even when I wasn't in the room to correct it. School started on August 21st, and that's when the exhaustion stopped being background noise and became something I couldn't ignore. I was carrying 2 AP classes and a credit recovery course I still needed for a class I'd missed during a placement disruption 2 years earlier, plus a part-time job at a smoothie shop I'd taken specifically because Renata told me in July that if I wanted my own money, I'd need to earn it like everybody else. Between the 6:45 laundry start and the 7:00 p.m. dishes and sweet block, there wasn't a version of my schedule that included homework before 9:30 at night. I fell asleep over a chemistry worksheet on September 2nd and woke up to find Grover had climbed onto my lap and fallen asleep too. Both of us slumped against the kitchen chair, and Renata found us like that and didn't say anything about the homework, only, "He needs his 7:30 bedtime, Ren, you know that." I tried out for the cross-country team the second week of school, mostly because a guidance counselor named Mr. Achabe told me colleges like to see extracurriculars, and I still, stupidly, was thinking about colleges. Practice ran from 3:15 to 5:00. I made the team on September 5th and quit it on September 9th because Renata said summer camp pickup for Grover was non-negotiable, and she wasn't running a taxi service on top of everything else, and there was no version of the math where I could be two places at 3:30 in the afternoon. I never told Marcus I'd quit. I don't think he ever noticed I'd joined. I want to tell you what changed everything, and it wasn't the apron, and it wasn't the schedule, and it wasn't even Deb's dinner. It was a Tuesday in mid-July, 3 days before I found the first piece of paper. When I was looking for tape in the home office turned my bedroom's old file drawer. The room had never been fully emptied, and I found a stack of manila folders that still had Marcus's handwriting on the tabs from before I moved in. And in the back of the second folder, behind a stack of old insurance statements, was a letter from the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, dated 4 months before my adoption was even finalized, before I'd met Renata more than twice. I didn't understand it that first night. I put it back. I want to be honest that I almost let it go, because some part of me was terrified of what I'd find if I kept pulling on that thread, terrified it would confirm something I already suspected, and couldn't undo the knowing of. But 3 days later, on July 18th, I went back for it. The letter was on Ohio ODJFS letterhead, addressed to Marcus and Renata Doyle. Subject line, Special Needs Adoption Assistance, Eligibility Determination, Case ID linked to my old case number from the group home. It informed them that, per my classification as an older youth, special needs adoptive placement, a designation given to kids like me specifically because we're considered harder to place past a certain age, with histories in the system, the state of Ohio would provide a monthly subsidy of $150, plus a Medicaid card, plus reimbursement of certain adoption-related legal fees, continuing until my 18th birthday, which was 11 months away. I sat on the floor of that little bedroom with the letter in my lap and did the math 3 times because I didn't trust myself the first 2. 11 months, $1,050 a month, $11,550, not counting the legal fee reimbursement, not counting the separate Medicaid coverage that meant they weren't even paying for the doctor visits they'd occasionally mentioned as some kind of favor to me. I thought about the apron. I thought about the $20 I didn't get for a movie. I thought about being told that watching a toddler for free every day was family, while a check with my name attached to it landed in a bank account I'd never seen. I thought about Carol saying, "At least the state helps out with kids like that," and how casually she'd said it like it was just a fact of weather. I didn't confront anyone that night. I want to be honest about that too. The version of this story where I burst out of that bedroom and threw the letter on the table is not what happened. What happened is I photographed the letter with my phone, put it back exactly where I found it, folder and all, and went and finished the dishes on the schedule, because I needed more than one piece of paper, and I needed them to have no idea I'd found it. That was the start of what I started calling, only to myself, the ledger. Over the next 5 weeks, I built it in a notes app folder labeled Bio Homework, so it would look boring to anyone who scrolled past it on my phone. I photographed the chore schedule off the fridge every time it updated, with a timestamp. I started logging. In a private spreadsheet I only opened on the library computer at the Ashford branch during my Tuesday and Thursday library hours, a habit I'd started so no digital trail existed on a device that lived in that house. The exact hours I spent on childcare and housework each week. By the second week of tracking, the number was 31 hours, unpaid, on top of a job that itself paid $10. $50 an hour, a number I noticed, with something close to a laugh that wasn't funny at all, was almost exactly the size of the monthly subsidy check divided by 28, cut down into hours I could actually feel in my feet by closing time. I want to describe one of the library nights because it's the closest thing I have to a sleepless night scene, even though it happened in daylight. September 11th, a Thursday. The library closed at 8. I was the last person at the computer bank, and the librarian, an older woman named Mrs. Strander, who'd started recognizing me by then, came by to say she needed to lock up. I must have looked the way I felt, because she asked if I was okay, and I said I was just tired, and she said gently, "You look like a person carrying something," and I almost told her everything, right there, over a library circulation desk. I didn't. I said I was fine and walked the 11 minutes home in the dark and lay awake until almost 1 in the morning doing the math again. The same math over and over, like repetition would change the number. August the 2nd, I overheard the conversation that told me the rest of it. I was in the hallway outside the kitchen, not hiding exactly, just standing still because I'd frozen at the sound of my own name. Marcus and Renata were talking low, the way people talk when they think a closed door and a running dishwasher will cover them. The subsidy review is in October, Renata was saying. We need the paperwork clean before then. If they think we're not, actively parenting her, actively integrating her, they can flag it. She's fine, Marcus said. She's settling in. She's fine because I've got her on a schedule, Renata said. That's the whole point of a schedule, Marcus. Structure. Kids like her need structure or they act out. That's basically what the caseworker told us at the home study. Kids like her. I stood in that hallway and let those 3 words land the way you let a wave land, bracing so it doesn't knock you down. And after she turns 18, Renata went on, quieter, The subsidy stops, and honestly, I don't know what the plan is then. She's not going to want to keep doing this for free once there's no Renata. I'm just saying, we should talk about it before June, not after. Whether she's staying or whether we help her find her own place, whatever's realistic. I went to my room. I didn't cry that night, which surprised me. I opened the notes app and I wrote down the date, the time, and as close to a word-for-word transcript as I could manage with my hands shaking. Kids like her, whether she's staying, whatever's realistic. 11 months of my life, budgeted and reviewed like a grant they were managing, with a built-in expiration date that happened to line up, dollar for dollar, with the day the check stopped. I called my old friend Priya that night from the bathroom, the only room in the house with a lock, and I told her everything in a whisper, sitting in the empty bathtub with my knees pulled up. She was quiet for a second, and then she said, "Ren, that's not a family. That's a contract you didn't sign." I didn't have a response for that. I just cried, finally, with the water running so no one would hear. There's a phone call from September 2nd I haven't mentioned yet. The same night I'd fallen asleep over the chemistry worksheet with Grover slumped against me. After Renata sent me to bed with that comment about his bedtime, I called Diane again, not with a fake school project excuse this time, just to hear a voice that had known me before any of this. It was almost 11. She picked up on the second ring, the way people do when they've told you to call anytime and actually mean it. I didn't tell her about the letter yet. I wasn't ready, but I told her I was tired in a way that scared me a little, that I'd started forgetting what I used to like doing before all my hours belonged to somebody else's toddler. She was quiet for a second, and then she said, "You know, the whole point of the Bridges program was to show you what a family could feel like. If it doesn't feel like that, you're allowed to say so, out loud, to someone who can actually do something about it." I told her I would soon. I meant it, even though soon turned out to be 5 more weeks. I want to tell you about the night I almost said something and didn't, because I think it matters, because it's the part of this story where I was still, underneath everything, hoping I was wrong. August 9th. August. Marcus came home early, a rare thing, and Grover was napping, and Renata had gone to get her nails done, which I remember specifically because it cost $65, a fact I know because I saw the receipt on the counter later and photographed it out of habit by then. Marcus sat down at the kitchen table where I was doing my own homework, and he asked how I was doing. Really asked. The old Fridays booth way he used to ask. I almost told him. I had the letter practically memorized. I opened my mouth, and what came out was, "I'm tired a lot." He said, "You're a teenager, that's normal," and reached over and squeezed my shoulder, and I let it go, because some small, stubborn part of me still wanted him to be the man from the Bridges program, the one who remembered I hated tomatoes, and not a man who'd read a subsidy determination letter, and then handed his new daughter an apron 2 days later. I found the receipt for Renata's nail appointment on August 9th. I found a receipt for a $340 charge to a medical spa on August 21st, a filler appointment. I looked up the name of the place later. It was right there on Google. 3 days after the August subsidy deposit would have landed, based on the payment schedule listed in the original letter, the 15th of every month. I started cross-referencing. I'm not a forensic accountant. I was a 17-year-old with a library card and a grudge and, by September, an actual folder of evidence. The original ODJFS letter, 7 weeks of time-stamped chore schedule photos, my own hour-logged spreadsheet, the transcribed hallway conversation, and 4 receipts that lined up within days with subsidy deposit dates I'd started tracking after finding a bank statement carelessly left on the printer tray in the office that confirmed the account the subsidy landed in was one with only Marcus and Renata's names on it. There was a 5th receipt, and it was the one that actually made me put my head down on the library desk for a minute. September 19th, a Friday. It was a deposit confirmation for a family trip to Hilton Head, booked for the following spring. A rental house for a week, $2,150. Paid in a single transaction dated September 16th, 1 day after that month's subsidy deposit. Under traveling party, on the confirmation printout Renata had left in the recycling instead of the shredder, it listed Marcus, Renata, and Grover. 3 names, not 4. I also found, on September 6th, a smaller thing that somehow hurt worse than all the money. A single receipt from a discount shoe store dated back in July for 1 pair of children's sneakers, $22.99 for Grover. That same week, I'd asked Renata if I could get new shoes. The soles on mine had a hole I'd been covering with duct tape from the inside for a month. You could feel the pavement through it on hot days, and she'd told me the budget was tight that month and I should try the church clothing closet. The subsidy check had come in 9 days earlier. There was one more piece of paper that mattered, and I almost didn't find it because by mid-September, I'd started to feel like I'd already found everything the house had to give me. On September 21st, a Sunday, I was hunting for a stapler in the office, and I opened a drawer I hadn't checked before, and inside was a Medicaid card with my name on it. Ren Doyle, my new legal name, issued back in April, before the adoption had even finalized, back when I was still technically a ward of the state living under a pre-adoptive placement agreement. I had never seen that card. I had been going to the smoothie shop and paying out of pocket, in cash, for an inhaler refill in August, because I told Renata I was having trouble breathing after a cold, and she said our insurance had a high deductible and it wasn't worth a copay for just an inhaler. I paid $46 for that inhaler with 3 shifts worth of tips. The Medicaid card in that drawer would have covered it completely, no copay. I looked it up later. I sat on the office floor holding a health insurance card with my own name on it that I'd never been told existed, and that was the moment the whole thing stopped being an abstract math problem and became something that had actually cost me money, out of my own pocket, for no reason except that nobody in that house considered it worth worth telling me the truth. I reached out to Diane, my old Bridges coordinator, on September 24th, careful to frame it as a general question, not an emergency. I asked her, over a text exchange I still have saved, whether adoption assistance funds were legally required to be spent specifically on the adopted child. She sent back a state fact sheet confirming what I'd already started to suspect. Subsidy funds are intended to help meet the needs of the adopted child, and families are expected to use them accordingly, and that a caseworker conducting a subsidy review can and does examine whether funds are being used consistently with that purpose. She asked if everything was okay. I told her I was just doing a school project on foster care policy. I felt bad lying to her. I did it anyway, because I still wasn't ready for anyone to intervene before I was ready. There was one last aborted confrontation before the party, and it's the one I regret the most, though I understand now why I didn't go through with it. September 30th, 5 days before the Gotcha Day event, Renata asked me to help address the invitation envelopes at the kitchen table. 40-some of them, family friends and church contacts and a few neighbors. I sat across from her, folder of evidence essentially memorized by then, and for a moment, addressing envelope after envelope in my own handwriting, I thought about just laying it all out right there, quietly, two of us. No audience, no stakes beyond the two of us finally being honest. I even opened my mouth. I said, "Can I ask you something about the finances?" And she looked up and something in her face went instantly careful, guarded, and she said, "What about them?" in a tone that made it clear the door I was reaching for was already closing before I'd finished raising my hand toward it. I said, "Never mind," and licked the next envelope shut. I understood sitting there that a private conversation was never going to get me an honest answer, because every private conversation for 4 months had ended the same way, with me smaller and her certain. I needed witnesses. I hated that I needed witnesses, but I did. By late September, I had what I needed. What I didn't have was a plan for what to do with it until Renata handed me one herself. She announced on September 14th that they were throwing a Gotcha Day party for me, a term I'd heard other adoptees use with real affection, a celebration of the day you legally became someone's kid. And I want to be clear, I don't think the concept itself is wrong. But Renata's version was scheduled for October 5th, 3 months and 2 days after my actual adoption date, and I understood within about 4 seconds of the announcement why the timing wasn't random. October 5th was 2 weeks before the subsidy review Renata had mentioned in the hallway. She wanted photos. She wanted extended family and neighbors, and she said, a few people from church who help with the adoption ministry, standing in a backyard watching Marcus and Renata be celebrated for taking in a struggling teenager out of the goodness of their hearts, timed precisely so those photos and that goodwill could sit in a file somewhere, ready, if a caseworker asked hard questions in 2 weeks. She asked me, on September 28th, if I'd say a few words at the party. Just something sweet, she said, about how far we've come as a family. She smiled when she said it. I smiled back. I spent the week before October 5th writing 2 versions of a speech. I want you to know I wrote the sweet one first. Actually wrote it. 3 paragraphs about gratitude and second chances. Because even then, even with a whole ledger sitting in a folder on the library computer, some part of me wanted it to be true enough to say out loud. I deleted it on October 3rd, sitting at that same library desk, and started the other one, October 5th. 51 people in the Doyle's backyard. I counted later, off the photos other people posted, because I wasn't in a state to count in the moment. String lights Renata had bought for the occasion. A banner that said, "Welcome to the family." Ren in gold cursive. Deb was there. Marcus's parents drove in from Columbus. 4 women from the church adoption ministry stood near the dessert table, with a phone out, filming, the way people film things they plan to post. Renata handed me the microphone at 6:40 in the evening, right after Marcus made a toast about opening our home. I remember the exact words because I've replayed them so many times. We just wanted to give her a real family, the kind of stability every kid deserves. 51 people clapped. I looked at Renata, and she was smiling the church ministry smile, the one built for cameras, and she nodded at me to go ahead. I said, "Thank you. I actually did want to say a few words about the last 4 months because I think it's important people know the truth about what this family gave me." I watched her face change in real time. It's a specific look, the one where a person hears the sentence before yours and realizes, half a second too late, that they've handed a microphone to someone they should have been afraid of. I told them about June 5th, 2 days after the adoption, and the apron, and the words "earn your bed," verbatim, in front of 51 people, several of whom I watched flinch. I told them about the chart on the fridge with my name on it and none of the actual parents' names. I said I had photos, and I held up my phone, and I read the date and timestamps out loud. June 12th, June 19th, July 3rd, because numbers land different than feelings do. And I'd learned that from watching how easily Renata dismissed everything I felt, and how much harder it was to dismiss what I could prove. Marcus said, "Ren, sweetheart, maybe this isn't," and I said I wasn't finished. I told them about the letter. I said the words "special needs adoption assistance" out loud, and I watched 3 of the church women go very still, because I think some of them knew, in the abstract, that subsidies existed, the way most people know abstractly that adoption assistance is a real and important program that helps real families provide for kids who need extra support. And I want to say clearly right here that the program itself isn't the villain of this story. Families who use that money the way it's meant to be used are doing something good. I said $1,050 a month. I said 11 months. I said the number out loud, $11,550. I said Medicaid coverage on top of it. And then I said the sentence I'd practiced the most. most. I have never seen a single dollar of that money spent on me. I've been wearing shoes with a hole in them since July because I was told the budget was tight. 9 days after that month's check would have landed in an account with only my parents' names on it. That's when Renata moved to take the microphone. This is not the time or place, she started, reaching for it, and I stepped back. And Deb, Marcus's sister, the loud, warm one, said, loud enough for the whole yard to hear, let her finish, Renata. Renata's next move was minimizing. Every family goes through an adjustment period, she said, forcing a laugh that nobody in that yard laughed with her. Chores are normal. I don't know what she thinks. I have the receipts, I said. I named the medical spa. I named the nail salon. I named the Hilton Head deposit and read off traveling party Marcus Renata Grover from the confirmation printout and let the silence do the rest of the work. I said the dates, each one landing within 9 days of a subsidy deposit. Someone near the dessert table said, quiet but audible, oh my God. I told them about the Medicaid card too, the one issued in April and buried in a drawer, and the $46 I'd paid out of my own tip money for an inhaler I didn't need to pay a cent for. I held up my phone with a photo of the card on the screen so the people close enough could see the name printed on it, Ren Doyle, my own legal name, on a card that had existed for 5 months without my knowledge, in a house where I'd been told the budget was tight often enough that I'd started believing it applied to me the same way it applied to everyone else living there. One of the neighbors, a man I'd only ever waved to from the driveway, said, not quietly at all, you had her paying for her own medicine while you two went to Hilton Head? And Renata's face went a color I'd never seen on a person before. Then came the blame shift. Renata turned it on me, the way I'd watched her turn every complaint I'd ever raised back on me for 4 months. She's been going through our things, she said, voice climbing. She's been in my office. That's an invasion of privacy. That's, Marcus, this is exactly what they warned us about with older placements, the acting out. I found a letter in an unlocked drawer in my own bedroom, I said, in a folder that was in that room before I ever moved into it. A few people laughed, not kindly, and not at me. Carol, Renata's own mother, standing near the fence with her paper plate still in her hand, said so quietly I almost missed it, Renata, is that true? About the trip? And Renata didn't answer her either. It was Marcus who broke, not Renata. I watched it happen on his face, the particular collapse of a person realizing he'd been so grateful to be handed a functioning household that he'd never once asked who was running it, or at whose cost. He set his drink down on the folding table hard enough that the ice rattled, and he said, Renata, is that true? The spa, the trip, is that true? And she didn't answer him, which was its own answer. And he said, quieter, mostly to himself. I read that letter, I signed that letter, and put his hand over his mouth. He turned toward me and said, Ren, I am so sorry, in front of all 51 people. And I believed him, because it was the first time in 4 months anyone in that yard had apologized instead of explained. One of the church women, I never learned her name, only that she introduced herself afterward as someone who'd fostered 6 kids over 15 years, walked over to me, not to Renata, and said, do you have somewhere safe to sleep tonight, sweetheart? I said I thought so. She gave me her number anyway and said to call if that stopped being true. Deb drove me to her apartment that night. In the car, she was quiet for the first few minutes, and then she said, I want you to know I had no idea. I feel sick that I sat at that dinner table in June and said she'd got it together with 3 kids like you were a chore she'd managed instead of my niece. I didn't have anything to say back to that. I just watched the streetlights go by and let myself, for the first time in 4 months, actually cry the whole way through. Not the 6 minutes on a toilet lid kind, the real kind, with Deb reaching over every so often to squeeze my hand at red lights. I didn't sleep at Birchwood Lane again for 11 days, while a caseworker named Priscilla Ames, a real one, the state kind, not the imaginary threat Renata had used against me for months, came out to do a welfare check that Deb had requested, and confirmed, in a report I later got a copy of, that the subsidy funds had been commingled with household accounts in a manner inconsistent with documented child-specific expenditures, which is government language for exactly what I already knew. Priscilla sat with me at Deb's kitchen table on October 11th and asked me to walk her through everything, and I did, ledger and all, and at the end she closed her folder and said, you built a better case file than some caseworkers I've trained, which was the first time in 4 months a full-grown adult with actual authority had told me I'd done something right instead of telling me to be more grateful. Marcus moved out of the house on October 19th, 2 weeks after the party. Not me, him. He told me, sitting across from me at the same Friday's booth we'd had our first celebration dinner in, third from the window, that he couldn't undo 4 months, but he could stop pretending the last 4 months hadn't happened. He said he'd started sleeping at Deb's, temporarily, while he figured out what came next, and that he'd asked his employer about relocating me and him to a 2-bedroom apartment closer to my school, so I wouldn't have to change districts again on top of everything else. I told him I didn't need anything to be perfect, I just needed it to be honest. He said, I know. I'm sorry it took a backyard full of people for me to actually listen to you, and that's the closest thing to a full accounting I ever got out of him. And I decided it was enough, because unlike Renata, he never once tried to make it my fault for finding out. Renata is still in the Birchwood Lane house. I don't know what happened with the subsidy review in October, and I've decided I don't need to know, because it isn't my job to audit her anymore. It was never supposed to be my job in the first place. 10 months have passed since that backyard. I'm 18 now. I share a 2-bedroom apartment near the community college with Priya, the friend who told me that night in the bathtub that what I had wasn't a family, it was a contract I didn't sign. It's a small place, a little water stained on one ceiling corner, with a kitchen table table we bought secondhand for $40 off an app, and a laundry setup down the hall that I use whenever I want to, on my own schedule, for my own clothes and no one else's. Marcus pays my portion of the rent, and more than that, he shows up. Actual Fridays, actual booth, third from the window, actual questions about my day that he waits around to hear the answers to. He finally repainted that old home office bedroom, the one that had my twin bed in it for 4 months, and told me it's mine whenever I want it, no schedule attached, and I believe him now in a way I couldn't back in June. I bought myself a pair of sneakers in November with my own smoothie shop money, on purpose, just because I could, and I still have them, scuffed up now from a whole winter of walking to campus. I rejoined a running group in the spring, not competitive, just 3 mornings a week around the reservoir near our apartment, because it turned out I still liked the feeling of moving my own body somewhere on my own time. I finished the credit recovery class. I finished both AP classes too, grades a little rougher than they should have been, a permanent record of one very hard fall semester, but finished, and I don't carry any shame about that anymore. I carry the ledger folder still, actually, backed up in 3 places now out of old habit, even though I hope I never need it again. I saw Renata exactly once more, in November, at a school pickup line, of all places, because it turned out our old and new districts overlapped by 3 blocks, and Grover's preschool shared a parking lot with the community college's childcare lab where Priya sometimes volunteered. Renata was buckling Grover into his car seat and didn't see me at first, and for a second I just stood there, watching, feeling nothing as dramatic as I expected to feel. Not triumph, not anger, just a kind of tired clarity, like looking at a math problem you'd already solved and checked twice. She glanced up and our eyes met for maybe 2 seconds. She didn't say anything, neither did I. She got in the car and drove away, and I stood there a minute longer than I needed to, and then I went and found Priya, and we got coffee, and I didn't think about it again until I sat down to write all of this out. There's one thing I haven't resolved, and I don't think I'm going to force it. Grover turned 3 in January. I loved that kid, genuinely, not performed for a schedule on a refrigerator. The months we had were real, even if the framework around them wasn't. I still think about him some nights. Wonder if he remembers the person who used to sing him the same 3 songs on repeat during bath time. I sent one letter to the house in February, addressed to him, to be read to him whenever Renata decided that was appropriate, if ever. I haven't heard anything back. I probably won't. I've made a kind of peace with that not being mine to control anymore, the same way I've made peace with the fact that some of the people at that party, Carol, a couple of the neighbors, never reached out afterward either, even though they'd looked so shaken in the moment. I used to think a room full of witnesses meant a room full of people who'd follow through. Mostly, it just meant a room full of people who finally saw something they couldn't unsee, which turned out to be its own kind of ending, even without a single one of them calling to check on me later. If any of this sounds familiar, if you've ever had someone hand you a bill for love and call it family, I hope you know the math was never actually that complicated. You were never supposed to have to earn the bed. Anyway, that's the story. The full story is linked below and on my channel.